I have always found it quaint and rather touching that there is a movement, Libertarians, in the US that thinks Americans are not yet selfish enough. Christopher Hitchens. I'm fairly certain that a fair proportion of you, my subscribers, consider yourself libertarian, and so with this in mind, I invite you to reply to what I have to say on this topic below in the comments. If you think my following reasons are insufficient, please let me know, as I appreciate that I might just be missing something, and if I am, I want to know it. Anyhow, to explain why I'm not a libertarian, it stands to reason that I begin by describing what exactly libertarianism is, right? And so here's an attempt to stillman it. Likewise to all political philosophies, libertarianism represents a wide array of movements and beliefs, but all are predicated on the core principle of liberty. Now, what exactly liberty means depends on the libertarian, as traditional libertarians sought to abolish capitalism and private property, while contemporary libertarians advocate laissez-faire capitalism and strong private property rights. But a fair summation of all libertarians is that they seek maximum freedom of the individual and minimum authority of government. As such, they tend to insist upon freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to bear arms, freedom of and from religion, freedom of the press, freedom of ownership, freedom of the economy, and they almost always oppose the welfare state and taxation, which they see as a form of slavery. Or as the American Libertarian Party puts it, we hold that all individuals have the right to exercise sole dominion over their own lives, and have the right to live in whatever manner they choose, so long as they do not forcibly interfere with the equal rights of others to live in whatever manner they choose. Now that sounds pretty damn reasonable, right? Penn Jillette and Michael Shermer seem to think so.
But I voted Libertarian for many years now.
I've leaned Libertarian most of my life since college.
As does Ron Paul.
They said the role of government ought to be but one thing: protect liberty. That's the purpose of government.
Clint Eastwood.
And now you have called yourself a libertarian, is that right? Is that correct?
Yeah, well, libertarian values, that's where Republicans used to be when they were saving money and everything.
And according to libertarian websites, Keanu Reeves, Chris Rock, Vince Vaughn, Will Wheaton, Matt Groening, and countless more. And so why doesn't it convince me? Well, what follows is my three primary reasons. This is why I'm not a libertarian. One of the most eloquent and convincing summations of the libertarian philosophy that I've ever heard of comes from Walter Edward Williams, who in his book titled All It Takes Is Guts wrote the following. But let me offer you my definition of social justice. I keep what I earn and you keep what you earn. Do you disagree? Well then, tell me how much of what I earn belongs to you and why. And so, what's my answer? Why do I think that strangers are entitled to some of Walter's fruit? Well, to put it bluntly, Walter fell out of the right vagina at the right time. He inherited a biological and/or socio-economic advantage that he did not earn, and thus he does not deserve all of the fruit of his labour. He was dealt good cards. Now, Walter came from a broken family in a relatively racist country, and so how the hell can I say that he had an advantage? Well, for him, it's got more to do with nature than nurture, and to explain why, let me rewind a bit. In 1971, the American political philosopher John Rawls wrote a theory of justice, and within it, he, as many of you likely know, observed that when people contemplate and determine the structure and rules of society, they do so selfishly, based on their personal circumstances, characteristics, and preferences, such as their mental and physical abilities, social status, ethnicity, gender, and, most crucially, their conception of what's good. Thus, it's no surprise that some people who can afford the bare basics, such as shelter and food, want a society in which they're not obliged, through tax, to pay towards other people's bare basics. Likewise, it's no surprise that some people who can afford to pay for their family's medical bills want a society in which they're not obliged, through tax, to pay towards strangers' medical bills. Just as it's no surprise that some people who can afford to send their children to school want a society in which they're not obliged, through tax, to pay for other people's children to go to school, and so on and so forth. But the only reason they seek such a society, Rawls argued, is because of their lucky circumstances. They've been dealt good biological and socio-economic cards, and as such, they stand to lose a card or two should society attempt to equalise the hands of those less fortunate. Now, to get around this prejudice, Rawls proposed what he called the original position, and argued that a just society is a society that if you knew everything about it, you'd be willing to enter it in a random place. He reasoned that if people determined the basic structure of society behind a veil of ignorance, which would deprive them of information about their specific characteristics such as their ethnicity, social status, and gender, they would create a welfare state. They'd elect a society that maximizes the prospects of the worst off, because they themselves might be the worst off. They'd create a society that would ensure that if they or their loved ones were born blind, deaf, or dumb, they'd nevertheless have a life worth living. Thus, this is the primary reason I'm not a libertarian. Despite the fact that I came from a broken family and had a very rough upbringing, I am extremely lucky to have the characteristics that I do. And while I've worked extremely hard to get where I am, I did not earn the temperament, patience, charisma, and, if you will, intellect that I have. I was simply dealt good biological cards. Thus, I'm convinced that some of the fruit of my labour should go to those less fortunate, and that the same is true of Walter's fruit. Now, Sam Harris, in a post titled How to Lose Readers Without Even Trying, which admittedly makes me a little nervous about my releasing this video, put Rawls' original position this way. Many of my critics pretend they have been entirely self-made. They seem to feel responsible for their intellectual gifts, for their freedom from injury and disease, and for the fact that they were born at a specific moment in history. Many appear to have absolutely no awareness of how lucky one must be to succeed at anything in life, no matter how hard one works. One must be lucky to be able to work. One must be lucky to be intelligent, to not have cerebral palsy, or to not have been bankrupt in middle age by the mortal illness of a spouse. Many of us have been extraordinarily lucky, and we did not earn it. Many good people have been extraordinarily unlucky, and they did not deserve it. And yet, I get the distinct sense that if I asked some of my readers why they were not born with club feet or orphaned before the age of 5, they would not hesitate to take credit for these accomplishments. Anyhow, moving on, the second reason I'm not a libertarian is because I don't believe in natural rights, which I would argue is the very bedrock of libertarianism. If it wasn't, then all of morality would come down to arbitrary private contracts, and libertarians certainly don't believe that this is the case. They hold that we are born with certain inalienable rights, namely life, liberty, and, in most cases, property. But I see absolutely no justification for this. Many libertarians, such as John Locke, insist that these rights are God-given, that we have the right to liberty because God said so. But I, as an atheist, obviously don't find this convincing. And what's more, even if I was a Christian like Locke, I'd still reject his assertion, as in my opinion, the Bible explicitly states that it's perfectly fine to deprive certain people of liberty. While other believers in natural rights, though not strictly libertarian, such as Immanuel Kant, insist that natural rights are derived from reason alone, that, in Kant's case, they're categorical imperatives. But I reject this because I don't believe any action is non-contingent, and I'll likely explain exactly why in a future video, rather than needlessly cluttering this one. And so to those of you who are libertarian and non-religious, I'd like to ask a question. What makes you think we're born with natural rights? What part of the state of nature possibly yields the right to liberty? Sure, we're born free, but that doesn't mean we have the right to be free, does it? As it stands, I maintain that Thomas Hobbes got it right when he said that in the absence of a social contract, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And yes, I know that Hobbes believed in natural rights, but I find his argument to be inadequate, albeit practical. Again, I'll try and address this in a future video. The third reason I'm not a libertarian is because I don't believe in libertarian free will. On top of the fact that we're not responsible for the biological and socio-economic characteristics that we possess, I also don't think we're responsible, in the libertarian sense, for anything. I've discussed the illusion of free will in previous videos and so won't repeat myself here, but in case you still believe in free will, and especially if it plays a role in your libertarian worldview, which I'd assume it must, please consider checking out said videos. If we're not responsible for our actions in the libertarian sense, which is to say, for example, if my being a YouTuber isn't entirely of my own volition, then how can I sincerely take credit for the fruit that it produces, let alone insist that I deserve them? To use Rawlsian terminology, I might be entitled to most of the fruit, but I don't deserve them, and I certainly don't deserve all of them. If we're deterministic entities, libertarianism simply doesn't work. And so there you have it, the 3 primary reasons as to why I'm not a libertarian. Now, don't get me wrong, I consider myself a liberal, at least in the classical sense, and in many situations I stand side by side with libertarians. But I don't call myself a libertarian because I don't believe in free will, I don't believe in natural rights, and, most crucially and ironically, I don't believe libertarianism represents true liberty. True liberty, in my opinion, requires equal opportunity, and libertarianism doesn't deliver this. In fact, to the contrary, it protects those arbitrarily dealt good cards and leaves those arbitrarily dealt bad cards to die. It addresses freedom from, but it utterly fails to address freedom to. Now, as said at the beginning, if you think any of my reasons are insufficient or that I'm missing something crucial, then please let me know, as I'm entirely self-taught, and as such, I appreciate that this makes me vulnerable to missing a thing or two, despite extensive research. Anyhow, I'm Stephen Woodford, or Rationality Rawls, and as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and those of you who have supported the channel via merchandise and PayPal. Until next time, my fellow apes, until next time.